the rules that I feel like end up like leading to so many of the problems that we see that are, do get inflicted by toxic masculinity, violence and abuse, just general cruelty.
Literally, man. Not a fucking clue.
Shut down or conform in a way that usually feels like this, like I am closing off.
That is the most female thing I've ever heard anyone say. I mean, first of all the hand motions are extremely female. Should I do more hand motions? I mean, if you want to look more like a chick, I guess you could.
Yeah, you're struggling with those things because you're looking to other men to tell you how to be a man because you're a woman.
Maybe she's uncomfortable with male mannerisms and expressions of masculinity because she's not a man.
A lovely commenter on one of my previous videos asked me to discuss the backlash Elliot Page faced recently for his comments on masculinity, and I thought it was a great segue for me because I do want to start talking more about toxic male behavior on this channel. I normally speak about toxic male behavior through the lens of true crime, which is its most extreme, and I tend to talk about toxic female behavior through celeb controversies, but I want to expand on both of those. I'm working on several different videos on toxic male celebs currently that I hope to publish very soon.
Healthy masculinity to me is, or even just something I've felt as transitioning, is like leaning away from whenever there is some sort of impulse or expectation you've put on yourself to like shut down or conform in a way that usually feels like this, like I am closing off. I remember kind of being like, oh, Elliot, maybe you should, talk with your hands a little less, or, maybe in pictures, because ever since transitioning, now I'm like, Johnny, I am smiling in those photos. Whereas I used to be I could barely look at a photo of myself. I was always like, and now, and I'll be say a dude's like, hey, are you Victor from Umbrella Academy? And we're doing a photo together. He's very, I'm very, and like having that moment where I'm like, oh, should I also not? Like, should I also be
close
off?
It's
just like, what the fuck, Elliot? What are you talking about? Like, oh, honey, you're the part of the problem. To me, healthy masculinity would be, well, healthiness for anyone to just, love themselves, be able to care for themselves, ideally get rest when they can, like just the practical basic, drink water, like eat a banana, and also just, doing what you can to be intentionally and mindfully not letting yourself get like swayed or twisted by the rules that I feel like end up like leading to so many of the problems that we see that are, do get inflicted by toxic masculinity, violence and abuse, just general cruelty.
Well, Elliot Page, a famous transgender man, set the internet ablaze recently by daring to discuss their definition of healthy masculinity, and the reactions to it have been interesting. Most people I've seen have been appalled by his daring to define masculinity on his own terms at all whatsoever, and of course, some of them are getting in cruel jabs that his masculinity is just femininity in disguise because at heart, they want to suggest that he's still a woman.
Shut down or conform in a way that usually feels like this, like I am closing off.
That is the most female thing I've ever heard anyone say. I mean, first of all the hand motions are extremely female. Should I do more hand motions? I mean, if you want to look more like a chick, I guess you could.
Yeah, you're struggling with those things because you're looking to other men to tell you how to be a man because you're a woman.
Maybe she's uncomfortable with male mannerisms and expressions of masculinity because she's not a man.
I won't get into the politics of gender ideology because it feels like no matter what you say, people will be pissed about it. I happen to think it's an incredibly convoluted topic that warrants a great deal of research and compassion. I hate the way some people discuss this topic so insensitively. So until I'm better researched on it, I don't feel comfortable discussing it in detail. But beyond that, I will say the response to Elliot's description of masculinity feels absurd to me because he was correct.
Don't be toxic. Don't be violent. Don't be abusive. That's what she's saying is healthy masculinity. She hasn't got a fucking clue, man. And we're sat here supposed to take this woman seriously as a fucking man. Piss off. I'm not doing this anymore. I don't get me wrong. People can live how they want. You fucking want to walk around pretending you're a man, you crack on. Be happy. But this is nonsense, this, that we have to go around talking to this person as if they're a fucking man, asking what's healthy masculinity. You ain't got a clue, man. And people listen to this shithead.
Oh no, this one is so weird. How does it feel having that big black cock inside you? Fuck. Does bigger feel better? And then she blurs out her response. Then he goes, fuck. Would it be okay if I sucked it after it's been in you? And then she blurs out her response. I'll deep throat it for you as I come inside your pussy. And I can feel your pussy all stretched, and I know you can take a bigger cock than mine and humiliate me.
I would like to separate people's criticisms of Elliot's definition of healthy masculinity from their aversion of his transgender identity. I think it's important to distinguish that the outright rejection of what he's saying in that clip doesn't seem driven by any true intellectual opposition to the content of his response, from what I can see. They're just reflexively dismissing it because he has become another insufferable celeb as a result of his politics. Most people are like, well, you're wrong because you're not actually a man, or this is silly, or this is frivolous, or you're just thinking like a woman. Yet, if a biological man were saying the same things, for instance, I honestly don't believe they would have received such a hostile response. For example, I watched most of this Vice episode called Be a Man, where modern men and traditionalists debated what it meant to be a man, and I found it quite endearing and thought-provoking to hear men define what masculinity meant to them, as well as discuss their insecurities with the idea of manhood and what they have determined their responsibilities to be as a man. It was also interesting hearing men discuss how some of them used to embody toxic masculinity until they matured or found the Lord and realized the error of their ways. It's refreshing to hear that some men do grow out of those harmful behaviors and attitudes, usually by addressing their mental health or by being introduced to a new perspective, like through Christianity, for instance, although some would probably argue Christianity is as a purveyor of the patriarchy. I thought all of their perspectives were valid, no matter their worldview or how they defined masculinity, and I kind of think that's the point. Masculinity can mean different things to different people as long as it's healthy. It becomes unhealthy the moment you attempt to rigidly define masculinity as one set of rules or very specific behaviors and then force others to conform to that definition, no matter how detrimental it is to their mental, emotional, and physical well-being and the well-being of those around them.
Many of us are operating from a place of tradition, just the way things always have been. We need to get men into their hearts and out of their heads. There's freedom outside of these rigid definitions of manhood.
And so the lessons that we're being taught from early on is that being a woman or being feminine or being anything that's not within the man box, within the confines of this construct, is bad. So what I'm gonna do next is I erase the labels man box, not manly box. When we take away these barriers that society places on us, our parents, our peers, our teachers, media, whatever it may be, when we strip those away, we get to be whoever we choose to be, and we find that we are some of the very things that we were taught that are not manly.
My point is, some of the stuff Elliot was saying was necessary for some men to hear, especially young men still trying to navigate their own understanding of masculinity as it compares to society's expectations.
Hearing you need to be bigger, stronger, faster. So I was always having to prove myself and never succeeding. It made me very insecure and not feeling like I was good enough. When I was a kid, I had long blonde hair, I had a very high voice. I wasn't a cool kid. I was this awkward little kid. I sang in choir, I played clarinet in the band, but I also played baseball and football and basketball, and got to do all those different things and express myself in all sorts of different ways. Things changed around middle school. I started to get bullied and made fun of. You could call it a fag or a pussy or a sissy or a wuss, and that's when the social pressures really kicked in. I cut my long hair off, changed the way I dressed. I dropped my voice. I don't even know when my voice naturally broke. I have no idea because I forced it low. I played more sports and joined all the teams. I dated the head cheerleader and distanced myself from people who were less masculine than me.
But also, I get that some of the other things Elliot was saying came off as somewhat nonsensical or were difficult for people to jive with. This by no means is an endorsement of everything he was saying in that interview or even in other interviews. I honestly don't keep up with him at all, and I don't watch any of his interviews. I was just interested in the backlash of this particular interview, and I certainly did appreciate his take on healthy masculinity, and I'll explain why. At the end of his response, he said he didn't want to be a part of the problem, and by the problem he means toxic masculinity. So toxic masculinity has become one of those terms that people either use constantly or reject outright. And I think part of the problem is that it seems rather ill-defined, and the conversation around it has become so polarized, we've lost the ability to speak about it with nuance. Like most things, Google defines toxic masculinity as restrictive cultural norms that pressure men to act in stereotypically tough ways, such as suppressing emotions, avoiding medical care, and acting aggressively. Rather than condemning men, it highlights how rigid gender expectations cause harm to the individuals themselves and society. The core characteristics would be emotional suppression.
Healthy masculinity to me is, or even just something I've felt as transitioning is like leaning away from whenever there is some sort of impulse or expectation you've put on yourself to like shut down or conform in a way that usually feels like this, like I am closing off.
From her understanding, healthy masculinity is when you feel the need to shut down. You shouldn't.
Yeah, I think it's just like healthy masculinity could just mean a really good cry.
Oh my God. We don't want to cry. Men don't want to cry. That's what girls do.
Emotional suppression, the idea that men should never show weakness, fear, or sadness. This often leads to anger being the only socially acceptable male emotion. Hypercompetitiveness and power, the belief that a man's worth is tied exclusively to his financial success, physical dominance, or social status. And anti-femininity, the stigmatization of anything perceived as feminine, including showing empathy, nurturing others, or seeking help.
We don't want to cry. Men don't want to cry. That's what girls do.
Exactly at the age that we began to hear the language, the emotional language, disappear from boys' narratives. In the national data, that's exactly the age that boys begin to have 5 times the rate of suicide as girls.
The way boys are brought up makes them hide all of their natural, vulnerable, and empathic feelings behind a mask of masculinity. And also, when they're most in pain, they can't reach out and ask for help because they're not allowed to, or they won't be a real boy. They're shamed into this, and they're very ashamed to break out of it.
The term emerged in the late 1980s and early 1990s within the mythopoetic men's movement, which, according to The Guardian, was a highly influential, hippie-adjacent collection of male therapists, activists, writers, and healers led by the poet Robert Bly. The term toxic masculinity emerged from the work of psychologist Shepard Bliss. Bliss used the phrase to distinguish harmful, culturally conditioned expressions of masculinity from healthy or positive forms of masculine identity. His intention was not to argue that masculinity itself is inherently harmful, but rather to identify social expectations that encourage men to suppress emotion, seek dominance through aggression, reject vulnerability, and equate manhood with power or control. Most academic definitions do distinguish toxic masculinity from masculinity as a whole, although the two often get conflated in public discourse, both by some feminists who generally despise men, and also by some right-wingers who want to dismiss the notion altogether by pretending critics of toxic masculinity want all men emasculated and feminized, which is not the case.
Toxic masculinity. That's a hilarious expression, because you need to thank toxic masculinity for all the bridges, all the jets, all the rockets, all this toxic masculinity. If you break down all the things that men have invented.
He's totally misrepresenting the definition here. No one is denying men's contributions to civilization. He's also downplaying the role women have played, and as far as inventions, he's also ignoring that historically, women had less access to education than men. They were excluded from certain schools and programs. Their curriculums differed when they did attend school. They were excluded from certain professions and discriminated against, thought to be inadequate, insufficient, unintelligent, only capable of domestic things. The number of female writers alone who wrote under male pseudonyms to have their work professionally published is absurd, or who had their work stolen by their husbands. This all demonstrates that they were socialized to focus on domestic matters and to aspire to find husbands, even when attending college or university. I believe Mona Lisa Smile, the movie, is a good representation of that. That even when women were attending school or university, they were still socialized to ultimately aspire to find a husband in life. So that might explain the disparity in the number of female versus male inventions. But none of that has anything to do with, nor does it debunk the concept of toxic masculinity.
I think toxic masculinity is a talking point created by the modern feminist movement and the hard left to make men feel bad.
Yeah, so toxic masculinity is a set of social expectations of how we think masculinity should be that is not just toxic to people around the man, but it's actually toxic to the man. You're a man, so you got to be stoic, you got to be, don't show your emotions, crying is weak, don't ever be vulnerable. There's a time and a place to suck it up. I agree with that. I'm not saying men should be out bawling about everything. Mm-hmm. I do think that there are plenty of men, and it's been demonstrated as well, who are shamed for being vulnerable or for expressing emotions because it's seen as being unmanly. And that kind of a mentality is just so detrimental. I mean, when I talk about this issue, my goal is not to shit on men. My goal is to actually point out a big problem that's hurting men.
So the misinterpretation of the term goes both ways, but many scholars contrast toxic masculine norms with positive masculine qualities such as courage, responsibility, protectiveness, integrity, self-discipline, and leadership. So point being, toxic masculinity is not a myth, like some right-wingers would argue, but it also shouldn't be used to demonize all traditional concepts of masculinity, as they are not all inherently bad. Men are needed. They fulfill a very unique role in society within the structure of the family, but also as policemen, firemen, servicemen, and heroes of all kinds. They do and have done undeniably great things, especially like defend the freedoms we enjoy and take for granted on the daily. They also do the most dangerous and grueling jobs in other sectors, and are a comfort to have around the home for protection and labor-intensive work. I tried to cut my own grass the other day because my nephew wasn't available and couldn't use my arms for like 2 days afterwards because the weed whacker was way more exerting than I expected, because men make it look so easy. It also doesn't help that I let the grass get so tall that I basically have to weed whack the entire lawn before I can even begin to mow it, so that's on me. But I just wanted to illustrate that my perspective on toxic masculinity is coming from someone who adores men and male maleness and who is incurably attracted to men, but also someone who often gets caught up in a generalized frustration towards men because of the way so many of them treat women in relationships, ranging from infidelity to narcissistic abuse cycles and domestic homicide. And to be fair, I also tend to get caught up in perpetuating what perhaps can be seen as toxic ideas of masculinity myself, because if I'm honest, I like testosterone. I want my man to be a provider. I want my man to be aggressive when necessary, especially when protecting me or our home. I would also expect my man to make at least the same or more income than me. Otherwise, I don't care how fine he is. It would be deeply unattractive to me if he wasn't financially secure. If a man has to ask me for money, I can think of nothing grosser. Men being successful and well established is sexy as hell. I also want my man to be big and burly and tall. I love broad shoulders, big hands, and feet because I want to feel protected by his mere presence. I know that's probably a little superficial of me, but I grew up reading historical romance novels, so I'm sorry, but that's just my idea of manhood, and those are just my preferences. Obviously, I also want him to be God-fearing, intellectual, and moral, but I can see how some of my other more superficial ideas of masculinity can be emasculating to men who don't measure up to my arbitrary standards. My ideas of masculinity are kind of warped by my experiences and of course the media I've consumed like most people's. And I came from a very male-dominant, patriarchal home with sickening domestic abuse that had harrowing effects on my entire family, but especially my brothers because they lacked a healthy male role model despite my father being present our entire lives. He was a tyrannical bully. In the past, he was extremely domineering and dysfunctional and narcissistic and embodied those extremely toxic ideas of masculinity like repressed emotion and ridiculous male chauvinism. He let go of a lot of that as he aged and became far more openly emotional as he aged. But in the past, my mother was to cook and clean and tend to the children 24/7, and everything she did and every aspect of the home had to be exactly to his liking or there would be an explosion. And I will never forget him taking the keys to the car from my mother whenever she upset him, basically treating her like a child and not his equal, or insisting that my mother should not leave the house without him or my brothers accompanying her because she needed to be protected, when really that was just another means by which he controlled and oppressed her. And it even got to the point that at times when my mother upset my brothers, they would say they were telling my dad, which is so insulting and belittling for your child to tell you. So sure, my dad taught my brothers some concepts of chivalry like opening doors for women and doing the heavy lifting, but it was also coupled with him modeling for them that serial infidelity and shouting women down and terrorizing the household was acceptable to do as a father because he was the man of the house and the so-called provider. Thankfully, my brothers didn't adapt his extremely abusive and aggressive nature, but they were left flailing for a while without a blueprint of healthy masculinity or how to navigate life and achieve success, which matters. And my current perspective on toxic masculinity is also coming from someone who often discusses toxic women and the way they use the guise of feminism and defying the patriarchy to be horrendous people, and then excuse it by saying, well, men have been terrible for years, so why can't we? Or they excuse their behavior by playing the victim of misogyny whenever they're called out for their narcissism or their schemes for personal gain, which they often pursue at the expense of others. Or worse, they fabricate salacious allegations to ruin men, knowing that in a post-Me Too society, broad swatches of the internet, including mainstream media, will defend them blindly, even if their narrative contradicts all of the available facts and evidence. And of course, that is coming from a place of good faith usually, with people on the internet wanting to believe women because so many women are victimized and are afraid to speak out. So I'm trying to come at this from a really balanced angle here. Traits often associated with masculinity, like confidence, protectiveness, provision, ambition, resilience, and leadership, can be positive. And obviously, these are not exclusively associated with masculinity. Women are capable of all of these things too, but they are heavily associated with masculinity. The issue is when certain expectations around masculinity become harmful, not just to the people around men, but to men themselves. My main takeaway is that Elliot was right about healthy masculinity being defined by not forcing himself to conform to gender norms, or stilted body language, or stoicism, like repressing his emotions and not smiling and shutting down certain aspects of himself, because in the long run, it would be harmful. That is undeniable. So I don't get people's reactions to him saying this, pretending like he was talking a different language, when everything he was saying is borne out by the facts and the statistics. Here is a very masculine biological black black man, saying much of the same things about how ideas of masculinity made him self-conscious about behaviors he engaged in, and even how he moved his body for fear of being perceived as unmasculine or worse, feminine. People discredited what Elliot said because he was trans, and spitefully insisted that this was basically what a female would think of masculinity, when that is simply untrue. Many men feel the same way, but are afraid to voice it for fear of being called unmasculine if they express uncertainty, which is just proving the point about toxic masculinity and how it utterly rejects vulnerability in men as feminine. Here are some examples I found of men on Reddit commenting about their experiences with toxic masculinity and how it forces them to conform or avoid certain behaviors. My favorite color is purple. I've tried to wear purple, and nope, too many dumbass comments. I got by an ex. Nearly everyone I told starts by arguing the toss that it wasn't actually rape. Getting shit on for not caring about sports. I'm sorry, I just don't want to spend my time watching people run around a field. And no, I don't want to play sports video games either. I've been called gay for rescuing a starving kitten and taking it to the RSPCA. I've got made fun of for wearing life-saving safety gear on job sites. There are now people who can't taste, smell, or hear properly because they were too stubborn to put on earplugs and safety glasses, since it's not manly to protect yourself apparently. And this is funny actually. I remember my brothers literally thinking it was weak to be seen wearing seatbelts in the car, or to apply their chapstick in a non-masculine way, or do things like hold an umbrella.
You're saying because I'm a guy, I'm unable to ask for help or express my emotions, because if I do, you'll call me weak. If I respect women, you'll call me a simp, and if I express sadness, you'll call me a sad boy. So what I have to do for the rest of my life is be emotionally unavailable, bottle up my emotions until I kill myself. That's pretty much it.
Elliot's definition of healthy masculinity was just a really subtle way of saying that if you care for yourself and allow yourself to be who you naturally are, then you tend not to develop the self-loathing and anxiety and self-consciousness that comes along with conformity and repression, and you therefore tend not to let your internalized toxicity leak out onto others in society, which is something that can be broadly applied, not just to men. It's true of both sexes. It is undeniable that insecurities and fear of not measuring up and mental health issues and repressed emotions drive men who do awful, violent things. I talked about it previously in my video on the serial killer Bob Hansen and Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer. The problem is that toxic masculinity is often used as a blanket accusation against men as a group. When people use it to imply that being masculine, period, or wanting to be strong or having traditionally masculine traits is inherently harmful, they are missing the point and contributing to the problem by making men resistant to the idea that toxic masculinity exists at all or is something that should be taken seriously and corrected. They end up just feeling that people hate men in general and become hostile to any criticisms of their sex. And they end up defending horrible people like Andrew Tate. To me, toxic masculinity is when rigid ideas about what a man should be create harmful behaviors or prevent men from living healthy lives. It's as simple as that. For example, the idea that men should never cry, never admit they're struggling, or never ask for help. The belief that vulnerability makes someone weak can have devastating consequences. Men are often taught from a young age to suppress emotions instead of processing them, which is something I witness often in my household among my brothers, and this conditioning can contribute to isolation, depression, and make it challenging for them to seek support when things get truly bad, which is something I discussed a lot when I covered the Menendez series. A significant factor in their abuse was the suppression of their emotions, their father and mother both making them feel weak and gay if they expressed emotions, especially Eric. He was often called a sissy. And so these behaviors, encouraging toxic masculinity, has consequences, and it led to the horrific double parasite of both parents, in addition to their other abuses like sexual abuse and verbal and physical abuse. And as far as like toxic masculinity forcing men to not seek support, I see this a lot in my personal life with the men I know. I lost a brother at a very young age because he could not bring himself to ask for help, and we had no clue how much he was struggling. We didn't see it until after he was dead, and it was unbelievably tragic. For men, there is also the pressure to always be tough, dominant, or to prove yourself.
I'll never forget showing up in Catholic school. Just right away, just hearing out, on the field, like, hurry up, you faggots. And you're just like, whoa.
Give me that soft crap. Don't cry. Take your ass whooping like a man.
I always say I'm so glad I was born a woman for the simple fact that I would have hated to go through trials at a young age to prove my toughness or coolness the way the boys around me had to. Although I was pretty scrappy as a girl and ended up having to fight a lot of boys when I was younger. Obviously, being female comes along with its own harrowing plights as you grow up and are objectified, and your body is constantly appraised and your worth is determined solely based on your looks. But for men, the idea of needing to prove yourself or be tough can come with terrible consequences. In some cases, it can contribute to bullying, aggression, and reckless behavior, like we saw in the case of Ollie Stevens, a 13-year-old schoolboy from Reading, Berkshire in the UK, who joined a gang because he was being bullied at school, and then he began engaging in harmful behavior himself to fit in, and was ultimately killed by his so-called friends who were in the same gang, who wanted retribution on him for like something ridiculous that he did or didn't do. I think he owed someone money because they set him up, and then they used a girl that he liked to lure him in, and then they resorted to homicide because they were losing the fight they started with him. He was handling himself quite well against two guys, and they couldn't take the humiliation, so they stabbed him. He was 13 years old, and this all stems from bullying and toxic masculinity. Not to mention, male aggression not channeled through healthy outlets leads to them doing things like joining gangs and engaging in criminal activity. And I had many instances where my family was put in danger because of the behaviors of my father, his male ego, his toughness, and his needing to defend his so-called honor. Toxic masculinity also leads to a refusal to acknowledge mental health struggles. There is something researchers call the gender paradox of suicide. Men have substantially higher suicide rates than women across the world, and it has been this way for centuries. Although women attempt suicide more, men are usually far more successful. That's because men are likely to use lethal methods, particularly firearms. In the United States, tragically, nearly 80% of suicide deaths are men. That is insane. That means men die by suicide at roughly 4 times the rate of women, which is bone-chilling. Men are also far more likely to be addicted to drugs and substances and to die from overdoses than women. And no, the rates of suicide and deaths from overdoses is not as a result of feminism and women speaking out against the terrible behaviors of men. These things were documented well before major feminist waves started affecting the conversations and discourse around masculinity and how men are perceived today.
The expectations that our culture puts on men are cruel. We objectify women, we also objectify men. And for men to feel like they're not measuring up to being manly enough is a big deal in domestic violence.
Expectations around masculinity are playing a huge role in this epidemic of male suicide and depression and loneliness among friends as well, not just women rejecting them. It's also them not connecting with other men. Their inability to express vulnerability and open up to other men is also an issue here, because gender norms affect every area of life and play a huge role even in finances and being perceived as successful in your career, having a successful marriage, having children, leaving a legacy behind, being respected. Not to mention ideas about physical appearance and conventional attractiveness and the ability to court women or defend yourself and your family. Men feel like they have to check every single box, and this is a result of those toxic gender norms. And if a man fails in any area of life, he's usually seen as a failure overall, even by other men, despite his successes in other areas. Like if a man has a good marriage and is a good father, but is not the main breadwinner, he is ridiculed, and he probably heaps a lot of criticism onto himself too, and ends up having resentment towards the women who are the breadwinners. A lot of women who are breadwinners are killed by men out of just envy and resentment in the relationship. Or if a man loses a fight defending himself or defending a loved one or just trying to defend his honor, how can he possibly regain his dignity or respect among society, and especially in the eyes of his romantic partner? Or if a marriage fails, many men become suicidal and in many cases homicidal. The amount of homicides that are driven by discussions of divorce or divorce proceedings or the aftermath of divorce when a woman is dating a new man is insane. toxic ideas of masculinity are also driving the incredibly terrifying incel community that culminates in dark web chat rooms where disaffected men are discussing their hatred of the women who reject them, and they're discussing their inability to live up to society's expectations, and are developing a nihilistic worldview that steers them towards acts of violence. When I personally talk about toxic masculinity, I'm referring to the belief system that leads some men to justify controlling, degrading, or abusing women, like I saw in my father, and the mindset that a man is entitled to a woman's obedience.
Breathe for the rest of the day. If you don't end up in a fucking grave, if you want to sleep in the house where I have to pay fucking bills, you're gonna shut the fuck up, you little prick. Because this is my fucking world, and you exist in my world. If you think you're smart enough to live on your own, fucking run away from home. But if you don't want to play that game, shut the fuck up or I'm gonna hurt you.
Her body, her attention, or her loyalty, which we often see in true crime cases. Also, those toxic ideas that say women are the property of men, which used to be the law, by the way, in a lot of countries.
But I said that if a woman is going out with a man, she belongs to that man. That's his woman. So if she wants to do OnlyFans, she owes him some money because she's his. Yes.
Which means she has no agency to leave or complain, and that if she does, he has a right to stalk her or harm her. And those toxic ideas that say jealousy is proof of love, that anger is justified because he feels disrespected, that total male control and female subjugation is sexy or is the dynamic that God intended, which is not true. That is where toxic masculinity becomes truly dangerous, and the numbers do not lie.
I went to jail. Then I went and found her and beat her up for calling police on me. And I went back again. All in one night. Restraining order ain't nothing but a piece of paper. That ain't gonna stop me from doing nothing. It ain't over till I say it's over.
Like many former abusers, Charles says he was violent because he developed the view that men should be in charge of women.
I figure if I had a reason, then it was just not being a woman beat. It was justified. It was corrective actions. Just trying to get some compliance.
Why did you used to think that it was important for a woman to fear you?
Because that's what I thought a man was supposed to. That's how a man supposed to behave in a relationship. I think it's the sense of having some kind of power. You have no power anywhere else in your life. And then I guess when opportunity presents that you can display a little bit of power, and I guess that's what I did, and it went too far.
And this is, of course, not about saying only men can be abusive. Women can absolutely be abusive and manipulative and emotionally draining, and I talk about that often. But the patterns are not identical, and pretending they are ignores reality. When toxic beliefs about male dominance are used to justify intimate partner violence, the consequences can be devastating, including women being seriously injured or murdered by current or former partners. The amount of true crime I watch that is just women being killed for being women being killed for daring to have agency, women being killed by partners who refuse to let them go is so gut-wrenching.
Why did you need to control her?
Because I was afraid that she would leave me. I was a negative entity. That anger had infected my whole body, and we became separated. But I became obsessive. And not only did I become obsessive, I became a stalker.
This covers the case of Judy Malinowski, the first woman to testify at her own murder trial. Judy's boyfriend doused her in gasoline outside of a gas station and lit her on fire, and it is all caught on camera and, yes, played in this documentary as a warning. 90% of Judy's body was burned, and she suffered in the hospital for nearly 2 years. And because they knew that Judy was not going to survive, they knew that her boyfriend was going to be charged with murder the second she died. So Judy was able to testify against him on camera before she passed away. But in order to do so, they had to remove her from all the medications because you can't be on medication when you testify, which means she testified in absolute agony.
And this also includes mothers being harmed by their sons on behalf of their fathers usually, or because of the sons' toxic ideas of masculinity, and daughters being murdered by their fathers and brothers in honor killings in certain extremist religious cultures.
A 15-year-old girl named Kauthar in Iraq was killed by her own brother and father and uncle. After throwing the body, they go to the streets to throw a celebration about it. You see hundreds of men on the streets celebrating the win of killing their own child. And in this trash-ass country, it's okay to kill a woman as long as you want to say it's for honor.
The patterns are horrendous. We often talk about true crime, but never through the lens of how much of it is just femicide committed by maladaptive freaks who have insane ideas of entitlement based on their masculinity and who harbor hideous ideas about the roles of women. And yes, some of those ideas are driven by religion or by people weaponizing religion to subjugate women. This is why men like Andrew Tate, who now identifies as a Muslim, are so dangerous, apart from his alleged sex crimes of rape and human trafficking. It's the fact that he's poisoning the minds of weak, disaffected men and boys, egging them on to hate, oppress, physically abuse, and sexually exploit women, and often uses religion to do so.
Because the red pill is presented as medicine, but it's actually a poison, and peer-reviewed research proves it. Red pill and manosphere content preys on angry, rejected men and turns their pain into blame. It tells them women are the enemy, that dating is a war, and they're losing. That feminism ruined everything. The very people they want to date become their adversaries. And it's easier to buy into that story than to look inward.
Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back very soon with another video.